This is Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative. This season, we're partnering with Democracy Exchange, Canada's Democracy Summit, taking place April 16th to 18th in downtown Toronto. The summit tackles today's most urgent civic issues over 3 days of programming, including inspiring speakers, thought-provoking expert panels, and hands-on workshops. As a Progress Canada listener, you can save 20% off registration by using this code, Lightbulb at DXC26. Visit democracyexchange.org to register today. Today we're joined by PEI Liberal leader Robert Mitchell.
Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for asking me to be part of your show. Thank you very much, Teresa.
Okay, so I want to go back to, your previous life as a politician, because this is not your first crack at it. So you were an MLA from 2007 to 2020. You were a cabinet minister, of course, in a previous Liberal government. And you were also the one-term interim leader, which is always a fun job as well. So Why did you decide to come back to politics now?
So I guess what I would say for me personally, the draw to public service is strong. And in actuality, it probably never left me. No matter where I go, Tim Hortons, the grocery store, the rink, people, lots of questions about what's going on within our province and within Canada. And they know that I like to follow what's happening locally and nationally. And so I never really felt like I left politics, although I'd spent a number of years outside and back in the private sector. So
just given the time you left in 2020, how different is politics on the island now from, a few years ago?
Well, you know what? When I left politics, we had been in government for most of those years, except for the last year before I left. And, as a government, I felt we were doing all the necessary things to make the lives of Islanders better. I'm not convinced that was maintained after we left. I think we see in a lot of areas where you would hope that they're better because of a lot of monetary investments are not even where we left them. So that's been a disappointing factor for me personally, and a reason why I stepped up, put my hand up to say I'd like to lead the province. I think I have the experience and the stability to do that. And here I am back at the table, hoping to make a difference in some of the areas that I see, are not as good as when we left, and they should be better today.
So I want to talk a little bit about the leadership race that you had last year. So historically in your party over the last 20 years, there hasn't been a lot of contested races. There's usually been a front runner, and then everybody else sort of clears the decks and gets out of it. But you did have a challenger, but you ended up winning that vote by 80% of the vote. You captured an enormous amount of the percentage. Why do you think party members responded so strongly to your leadership as a candidate?
Well, I think several reasons. I will say my reputation and how I, worked inside of two different levels of government, and as a minister of a couple of portfolios. So what things that I brought forward there, I think my reputation set well for me to run as a leadership candidate, but also at the time, I think that equates to experience. I think people were looking for experience. Our federal government of the day, they were looking for experience at the helm, and that related back down to our provincial leadership or Liberal race and leadership was experience. And I offered that experience from my time in government, and I offered what people would have considered stability, a steady hand at the wheel based on how they saw me perform for the 14 years while I was there, and for the last number of months as the interim leader at that time before I left.
So one of the first things you did when you became party leader was you threw yourself into a by-election, which there's always this question in politics of like, should the leader immediately go into a by-election? Should they pick a community that's really close to them? Yada, yada, yada. There's lots of debate about whether this makes sense or not, but you charged right in and ran in a by-election, and you only came 105 votes short, which is remarkable given where the party had been in that community previously. It was a 30% increase in the party's local vote share, but it's still a loss. So I'm wondering, what organizational lessons did you learn from that campaign that you're hoping to extrapolate sort of to a province-wide campaign next time?
Yeah. So I guess I really had no idea while we were just finishing our leadership campaign, just a few days prior to that a cabinet minister stepped down and left government and vacated that seat for this by-election opportunity. For me, same as in the leadership, Islanders reached out to me in significant numbers, to put my name forward for leadership. But again, they did the same to suggest, this is your chance to run in a by-election, get inside the rails of the legislature, and get at the role that you want to get at, which was incredible to receive that kind of support. But it didn't come easy. There were a lot of, I'll say, local inside the party folks that said, this is a seat that's been primarily conservatively held for the last 34 years. It's a very big task to take on. Is it the right task to do? But for me, I faced it the same way I faced the leadership. We had a huge team that was going to come forward and help me. I'm not one that shies away from work. We start early in the morning, we finish late at night. I like to think that I knocked on every door, and I think primarily we did. We might have missed a street or two, but for the most part, we put in full effort on that district, a conservatively held district for many, many years. We took the voter spread down from 1,600 to 105, and although I was not successful, everybody suggests that that's a huge win for myself as leader, for the party brand, and I'll accept that. It's sometimes it's hard when you're sitting in these roles. You either win or you lose. But in that particular case, I'm going to look at that as it was a successful campaign. We made massive inroads, which will set up well for the next general election in that riding, based on conversations I'm having currently with people, with doors that I knocked on in that by-election down in that district, who are feeling very comfortable about the next election. And as long as we're doing the same work we did in the by-election, it could be a different outcome for us down there this time.
This is something I talk about in politics all the time. Like, when you lose a campaign, people think you did nothing right. And when you win a campaign, you did everything perfectly. And, if you've been a part of a campaign, as you know, that's never the truth. There are always things that, go wrong or go right, regardless of how the result ends up. I'm wondering, are you going to be running in the same district, or will you be choosing a new district?
Well, you know what? I indicated to the folks in that riding, if you have me this time during the by-election, you will have me next time during the general election. So although that did not come to fruition for me, people in the riding that I represented previously were kind of, mad at me for suggesting that I wouldn't be coming back to this area. So that option is open to me. I am talking, though, full disclosure, I am talking with potential candidates for that district that the by-election was held in, and leaving all my options open, I guess, at this point. But I've stayed very connected with the riding that I've represented in the past, and in ridings in this area, which Charlottetown's small, as you can appreciate. So you're known in all the ridings in this area. And currently we have several districts, District 10, 11, 12, 13, that, we don't have permanent candidates in. So I have a lot of options as to where I would run in the future. And, District 2 will be well looked after with no matter who's on the ballot. And those conversations are being held today and until we get something figured out for certain. But, it was exciting down there, and to the residents from that riding, my heart is, I felt so appreciated down there, knocking on the doors and to come that close. It was an overwhelming feeling for myself, and it will be an overwhelming feeling during the next general election as we win this time.
Exactly. I wanted to ask, just because I know, I'm very familiar with the experience of door knocking. I've done it many, many times myself. And I see it as this really great opportunity to actually hear what people are really thinking about the issues, what things they're struggling with. Sometimes in politics, we can get a bit head county about it and just go, okay, you like us or you don't like us. And I don't think that's really the point of canvassing. Of course, it is to find out what kind of issues people are facing and how they'd like to see them solved. What were the top issues when you were going in the door during that by-election?
So, and I can, it's incredible that you asked that type of question, because during the leadership campaign, which started for me 12 months ago, and so I'm crisscrossed from Prince Edward Island, primarily talking to Liberals. That's who I'm looking for the support. But, bumping into other party supporters at Tim Hortons and various other places. So the message that I collected during the leadership campaign the parallels were exactly the same in a riding where, when you're speaking to people at the door, I have no real idea whether they were conservative supporters or liberal supporters, but the messaging was the same. Cost of living, number one. Although, people would have thought health was number one, cost of living was number one. You knock on a senior's door. That senior was trying to decide between heating oil, food, medications. You knock on the next door, young family just getting started, young children trying to figure out how are they going to come up with some money to afford a mortgage, or even the rent that they're having. So and then other families that are struggling, trying to support their seniors, parents, or their children, and finding the same struggle from within. Although their financial system might have been, or methods might have been a little bit in better shape, everybody felt the cost of living struggle at the end of the day. Second, though, of course, is healthcare, and that's probably no different anywhere in Canada or any province in Canada. But we have our own issues here, like others. Wait times, not enough physicians, not enough frontline professionals who have been burnt out, have not felt that they've been respected inside their workplace, toxic workplaces. So those were the healthcare issues. After that, education system on Prince Edward Island, which it's kind of unusual. Back when I started this in 2007, it was classroom sizes, student-teacher ratios. Today, completely different issues on their children's safety and grandchildren's safety. They want to know when that young person walks out the door, down the driveway, gets on a bus, their day is the best it can be. No fear of anything going on in the classroom that causes any concern to them. And that's become a real issue here over the last while, with a couple of cases that have come to light for child safety. So those were kind of the top three. There's always concerns on PEI. We mostly have I'll say a summer employment, which summers are busy here, winters are slower here. So what am I going to do for work, or my EI will run out. So those are other concerns as well. But it was key for me to note as I was talking to the Liberals for the first part, but then as get to the by-election where you're talking to Islanders, with no political affiliation totally, the messaging was very much the same. So I thought that was quite telling for Prince Edward Island.
You mentioned the summer, which just brings up the thought to me of like summer on PEI to me is okay. Church lobster dinners, corn boils. How many of those did you go to over the course of the summer while you were campaigning?
We did a lot of those, and our summer exhibitions, our summer festivals, and we have a lot of them. And I was away for 5 years. I forgot how many we had till we started attending them. But you know what? Everybody is there in their communities, and they're pretty much local, to every community around the island. But to be there, everybody's having a great time. Everybody's excited. Not everybody want to talk politics, but they were excited that you were there and you were interested in what's going on in their communities, and you were following along, and they appreciated that. And I think that set up well for me too, on my run as to how many people supported me, just because you were there, you were part of what was going on in the landscape of their community, and they really appreciate that. And that's an island way. That we take credit for all of those things that you mentioned: the lobster dinners, the hot dog festivals, ice cream festivals. It's a big part of Prince Edward Island, and that's why our tourism does so well. We're so welcoming for all of those events.
I gotta say, like in Ontario, we might have a rib fest or a spaghetti dinner. Sometimes there's a strawberry social, but I'm quite a fan of the lobster corn option personally. I think it's a better way to go. Speaking of being in all these communities, so the last election, the PCs at one point were up to 50% in the polls, and they were very well supported by the public. Your party, of course, had been in government. 2019 dropped to third place, has recovered a little bit since then. But, I've been checking out the polls in recent months, and the most recent polls that we saw from Narrative Research in the summer now had the PCs and the Liberals pretty much neck and neck. So what do you think has changed over the course of that period? I assume a lot of it has to do with, going into communities and talking to people, but what has changed that dynamic politically in the province?
Well, I think there's a number of factors that have changed that. On PEI, we want our governments to be extremely responsible with our tax dollars. And as of late on Prince Edward Island, we're kind of going through this rolling carousel of premiers, and indications that we are looking at about a $400 million deficit today, which was quite shocking and surprising to Islanders. So, they look at that and say, let's look at some alternative. Who could we look at next to place our X on their ballots? And we as a Liberal Party have been coming together strongly over the last year. And it's part of the leadership race. It's part of knowing that we can be that responsible government that has perhaps been lacking over the last little bit. And I'll say Islanders are appreciating our message. They're appreciating our visits. They're appreciating the message that we bring to their communities, and through our district representation in those areas where they live. So couple that, I think, with my experience and my stability and steady hand, I'm hopeful that's what's bringing them over to us. And you're right, the polls are dead heat, neck and neck, and we're got our foot on the gas pedal, and we're going to keep going strong.
I want to talk about that stability piece, because I know it was a big part of your leadership campaign, and between stability and experience, we just have to think again about what Islanders have gone through over the last few years. So you have the pandemic, you have inflation, you have this trade war, you have a cost of living crisis that doesn't seem to be going away. That is a lot of upheaval in people's lives. It's a lot of people, craving stability because they just can't see what the future looks like. And if there's one thing I've learned about politics, is that people do not like when things are up in the air. They really want to know that things are going to work out for them, that they can count on certain things in the economy, from their governments, all that kind of stuff. And so you brought up stability, and I've been watching the PC leadership race from afar, and it's, like I'm in Ontario, we just had a lot of different stuff happen in our, when we're recording this, in our politics yesterday, with by-election announcements and all this kind of stuff. But what's happening in the PC leadership race is really interesting to me, because again, we're getting, over the course of a year, 3 different premiers, potentially 4, depending on who wins, of course, at the time of this recording. We don't know that yet. But to me, if I'm an Islander, I'm looking at that and I go, you know what? There's so much going on in the world. I do not need this circus happening in the premier's office. I need somebody who's stable, who's experienced, who can chart the course of our province forward without causing all this other drama. And, one of the candidates in particular had previously been the premier, stepped down after hemming and hawing back and forth, I think 3 or 4 times. I lost count at the end of the day how many times he said, oh, I'm going to run, I'm not going to run, I'm going to run, I'm not going to run. And, as a voter, I think you think, okay, you're supposed to be leading the province right now, and you're making this all about you. You're not giving us any kind of stability we need to move forward as a family or as a business or any of this kind of stuff. Is it time for new leadership? Because it seems like this is just what the PC party is now. They seem more focused on like internal navel gazing than actually leading the province. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. And you know what? That's it, no matter where I go these days, to the restaurant, to the coffee shop, that's the exact message. It's the inconsistency of the government of the day and Prince Edward Island. I'm going to do this. No, I'm not going to do this. Yes, I am going to do this. All of that just creates confusion, and it creates a non-confidence level of Islanders that they throw their hands up in the air and say, look, I'm done with this. I want to go a different direction. Let's have a look at the other parties. And I think the Liberal Party is coming out as just that, a credible alternative to what's going on today in this rolling carousel of characters who seem to have their own self-interest first, and the interests of Islanders, not sure what level that's at. But for me, it's based on, I was there, I'm out. A lot of people say, you're back, you must be losing your mind. But this has been I never stopped watching politics. I grew up in a small country store in a rural part of Prince Edward Island. You helped everybody that needed help when my parents instilled that in me. That has never left me. So here I am looking to be that alternative, to give that confidence back to government that, I will do the right things. I will spend your money wisely. And the fact of the matter is, we've been in this situation before where we've taken over government in very financial, terrible situations, got it back on track, not only stabilized it, but changed it to where when we left, surplus dollars were there. So that track record that we have, Islanders look back to that, and I think they're coming our way. That's why the polls are, I'll say, dead heat at the moment. People are shifting the way they're thinking, and looking at, in some ways, a charade that's going on today, and looking for the steady hand stability. And I go back to my reputation in two departments over a number of years. I've led the charge on, a Prince Edward Island Water Act. I've led the charge on a Prince Edward Island Municipality Act. I made significant inroads within our health system at the day. And, my wish was truly that all of those things maintained and move forward with the new government. But it's a shame in some ways that things have reversed and have gotten worse. And I'm putting my hand up to go in there and make some changes. And, I'm very excited about this. The amount of people that are reaching out to me wanting to be candidates for the Liberal Party with the same vision, with the same clarity of where the changes we need to make the lives of Islanders better. It's so heartwarming and exciting for me. I can hardly contain myself some days, after I get off the phone with the conversations I'm having. It's so exciting to be rebuilding again. And I was there in 2007 when everything shifted before. And I have to say, the feeling and the vibe today is exactly the same as it was then. And we just got to make sure that, we're concise, we're clear. We don't want this waffling back and forth like has been going on the other side. And that's the promise I'm making to Islanders, and I think it's being well appreciated and received.
I love that because, but people always say, like, in government, you can do more in a year of government than you can do practically anywhere else in terms of changing the lives of people, in your home province. So I 100% understand the feeling you're talking about, because I have felt that too, in 2014 when I got to work for a majority government there and get that election done. It is really, really cool to make positive change for people in ways that you just don't get to do almost anywhere else. So I actually do want to pivot to, the policy side of things, because we talked about the politics and the horse race a little bit, but I want to talk about policy. So obviously, there's a cost of living crisis going on. It's not unique to Prince Edward Island. It's not unique to Canada. It is really a global issue at this point. And obviously, trade war issues are compounding that. Now, Islanders, I was looking at the stats, and Islanders had the best year wage growth over the last year. But at the same time, their purchasing power is still declining, and there is still a cost of living crisis. So obviously more needs to be done. I'm wondering, under your leadership, what would a Liberal economic plan look like in order to raise wages, protect workers, and lower everyday costs?
Since I began this process 12 months ago, and since the first thing I was hearing of cost of living, obviously the way to assist with cost of living and get dollars back into Islanders' pockets is tax relief. That's not a rocket science way of approaching this. So we have to determine what's the best way to do that. And there's various ways to look at that. And we're delving into that right now for quick relief. When you talk of you mentioned some things about increasing wages and things like that. Well, we do have to look at minimum wages. We do have to maintain what's going on there. Inside government, we work with unions on negotiation every day, and we do want a fair wage for fair work. It's the basis of the foundation here on Prince Edward Island. But we do struggle a bit with, I'll say, seasonality approaches. Our agriculture, our primary industries, our agriculture, our fishing, and even our tourism. And right now on PEI, we have threats south of the border regarding all of those industries. We don't know where this tariff threats are going to sit and rest at the end of the day. But I mean, here's an opportunity right now. And, I'll say this about Prince Edward Island. Right now, we are the chair at the table of COF, which is a really big deal. And it doesn't come around very often. We're now in our third premier representing that, basically, and possibly four. We're really possibly looking. We're not getting the benefit that we should at that table right now. And this is a big opportunity where we are, our national unity. We can develop programs or advancements within other provinces of Canada, and I think that's going to be critically and key. But we also have to work with Canada to look at investments outside of our boundaries, nationally, and work with others to, promote our lobster, promote our potatoes, which we consider the best anywhere in the world. But there's opportunity here right now, and I'd like to be part of advancing all of those, again, for the betterment of Islanders. But we have our good points, but we have our struggles with seasonal employment. And we do have to develop programming in all of those regards. But I think we are at a turning point right now with our I'll say the structures that we have in place. We just got to utilize them to their full ability, and we want to be part of that as a Liberal government in Prince Edward Island.
I was going to ask because Prime Minister Carney was just in China, and he negotiated a deal which included lobster, of course. So that was obviously very important to the island. Historically, in the 90s, I'm thinking the Chrétien years, that prime minister would go on these Team Canada trips and he'd bring all the premiers with him. Is that something that you'd want to push for should you become premier?
Well, you know what? I would really appreciate that opportunity because, first of all, we can promote what we have here, but it's such a learning experience for maybe things that I'm not even aware of at the day or are available. So I would definitely look forward to that. We have an advantage in our federal government with the Minister of Agriculture coming right from the community next to ours right here in Charlottetown. So that's a huge advantage that we have for Prince Edward Island. But let's not limit ourselves to that. Let's go out and learn and develop new markets and work with other places to maybe educate them on a little island in Canada that they may not even know about.
Well, I a week or two ago, I was chatting with the president of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture because I formerly worked at the Ministry of Agriculture in Ontario, and this was when it was the first Trump administration, and there was a lot of trade deals going on at the time. And I think people underestimate how important agriculture is to those discussions. And so, some people may see PEI as a small part of the country geographically and maybe even politically, but at the end of the day, I'm going to get into this question later, but it is a big part of our food security as a country and absolutely should have a seat at that table. Before I get into that, though, I do want to talk about healthcare. So you obviously previously held a ministerial portfolio of health and wellness. And I suspect, there's always been challenges on the island of getting doctors there and keeping professionals and all that kind of stuff. But there seems to be, in the last few years, across the board, across the country, a huge problem when it comes to wait lists, doctor shortages, emergency room closures. Part of this is demographics. We've known for a long time as the population ages, specifically boomers, that we were going to have more health challenges. But part of this seems to be cost cutting and not planning ahead. Given your experience in your previous role as Minister of Health and Wellness, what would you do to address all these issues on the island?
Well, Teresa, I think we got to begin looking exactly where you began with recruitment and retention. That's when I say that, I mean physicians, I mean nurse practitioners, I mean RNs, LPNs, all frontline staff have been experiencing fatigue in the workplace, exhaustion in the workplace, disrespect in the workplace, harassment in the workplace. So all of those things have contributed to, why I don't want to be a physician, or why I don't want to be a nurse in the system anymore. So that's a culture that we need to embrace and make some changes in there so that they do feel wanted, they do feel respected, and some of these things that should be easily approached and fixed that haven't been are addressed, at least start at the start. We probably, in my opinion, have one of the biggest advantages of Prince Edward Island that we never had in previous years, or didn't have in the time when I was sitting on the government side of politics and PEI. We now have a medical school in Prince Edward Island at our very own University of Prince Edward Island, just down the road from where I'm talking to you today. 20 island students, all from Prince Edward Island only, are attending this program at the University of Prince Edward Island. So there's 20 islanders who are going through a system that we should be able to work with to recruit and retrain them to stay right here in Prince Edward Island. This is where they grew up. This is where they did all their, elementary schooling, high schooling. This is where their friends live. Hopefully this is where their spouses will live down the road, or, that kind of a thing, and work with them on their tuition, work with them on whatever will allow them to stay here. Now, I'm not naive to think 20 island doctors coming through University of Prince Edward are all willing to stay in Prince Edward Island. Some of them will want to be, surgeons. Some of them will want to be specialized medicine. But if we can retain some number, which 50% maybe, it would be practical and reasonable, and grow that year over year. Now, this is year one, so it's 7 years before we see our first group of doctors coming through that program. But for instance, throw a number at the wall. If we could retain 12 of those, and then retain between 10 and 12 year over year after that, we'll be in pretty good shape, I think, for physicians. At that same university, we have our RN and BN program. Work with them to enhance those programs so that we can retain those people. Our best opportunities are in these islanders, but that doesn't mean that that's where we stop. We do have a number of what I will say international professionals, frontline professionals that have come to PEI but struggle to get accreditation. So we have to do a better job of those things. There's some of this that is staring us in the face. And, if you're turning your head to these and doing nothing about it, which, a criticism for me is that's what's been going on, then we're never going to improve any of those situations. I was in health back in the day, and I would have wished everything that I had, that we had a medical school in Prince Edward Island. Today, if I get back to where I am, we have that. What an advantage it is for us. What an advantage it will be for the Minister of Health in this region, especially over the next few years as they grow a program to ensure that those students stay right here in PEI.
I want to talk about that sustainability piece because, I'm thinking of the Ontario experience, which perhaps is the same as on PEI, I'm not sure. But we had this influx. My dad's a teacher. When he was a teacher, there weren't a lot of jobs because he was part of that boomer influx. And there weren't a lot of jobs in Ontario for teaching. So we actually went really far north to Moose Factory and Moosonee, which is in the very north of Ontario as you go towards Hudson Bay. And that's where I was born because of that. And now a lot of people my age, as a millennial, they've had the same experience for a while. Like 10 years ago when they were entering the workforce and wanted to be teachers again, there was no jobs. We've seen this on the nursing side too in Ontario, where a lot of the nursing instructors are aging out into retirement at this point. They're all sort of in their late 50s, early 60s, and they're starting to age out, and there's no one replacing them. We seem to not plan for these demographic shifts, and we seem to think, okay, we filled all the jobs, and then we're just not going to do it for 30 years. And that seems to be not the greatest plan, because you get the situation like you're talking about, where suddenly you just don't have anyone available. And I do think you're right that having the school there kind of gives the government incentive to constantly be investing in that workforce as a year-over-year project. Have you had that problem on PEI, and do you think this will help solve that?
Well, we're no different than any other jurisdiction in Canada for certain. We probably do have some aging out. Our boomers are getting to that age, but there's probably gaps there that we'll have to look at and address. I think on Prince Edward Island specifically, a lot of people they just like working, and they'll stick around a little longer if you make it the environment. Number one, it's not always about the money; it's about the working environment. And if you make that the very absolute best it can be, people get excited about being part of something that's going to make a significant difference 20 years down the road. They like to be part of, I'll say this, that solution piece that, if there's nobody there leading the charge, like you mentioned, and they're aging out, I think that we can get them to stay a little longer. But I'm sure that has been an issue, and it's probably part of our frontline issue today, where some have exited. They may not have wanted to fully exit. They would have stayed on at some part-time casual level. And if we make the system, function the way it should, then hopefully that will make it a little more attractive to keep those folks, that they're not quite ready to go, and they'd stay a little longer to utilize the experience that they have is unbelievable. So we can't lose that experience as well. But it's a good piece of to plant the seed in my head to make sure that is what we do address, because we're no different than any other province, and I'm sure there's a bit of that to deal with.
So the one other question that just jumped into my head, because this is what happens when I get talking, is also about healthcare. And I think we have a tendency to, people do this in retail too, to maximize profits. But in healthcare, we do it as well, where we basically do capacity hiring, where we say, okay, we'll hire just the bare minimum number of doctors, nurses, whatever it is that we need, in the standard amount of patient care that we need. We don't account for big influxes, crises like pandemics. We don't account for anything that would demand more bodies available, essentially. Should we start rethinking that just as a country about perhaps we shouldn't have everybody constantly run off their feet in this sector, and we should actually overstaff hospitals and clinics so that everyone can actually get proper care, as opposed to constantly trying to catch up all the time? Like, are we just going about this the wrong way?
Well, you know what? That's something that's been given, I'll say, a lot of consideration here in Prince Edward Island. When you come to your healthcare professionals, work-life balance is incredibly important, to these professionals. And that's something that we as a government have to realize and work with them. When you think back, especially on Prince Edward Island, probably no different than any other province, like back in the 80s, our physicians were working, I want to say, 18 to 20 hours a day. They were carrying panel sizes of, in some cases here, 6,000, 6,500 patients. We all just went to them and figured that was the norm. But I'm sure that was stressful on their families and stressful on their lives. So today the focus has shifted to work-life balance for our professionals, and that's what they require. So that has us here in Prince Edward Island looking at patient panel sizes, looking at things like medical homes, where a lot of these professionals come in and work together collectively and collaboratively on approaches, so that an islander does not have to have an assigned physician to them. They're not, but they belong to the medical home. And this is a process. I know the government of the day likes to tout that they did it, but we started that back before 2019 or 2017, 2018, when we started implementing that. I think that's a very wholesome approach to maintaining service for, I'll say, the sick islander versus the physician or the nurse practitioner or the RN or the LPN or the physiotherapist or whatever healthcare need they met. It's a really good system at the end of the day. So your needs are being met, and you're not being overworked, overstressed, maintaining the balance you need so that you come back to work tomorrow or next week or whatever your days on or off are. And I think that's a system that's appreciated, but something we probably, it's not where, in my opinion, where I would want to see it by now. So that's growth for us if we get back to where we need to be to ensure that that's something that's given a lot of focus. Even though we are, as I mentioned, they're heading to a $400 million deficit, there needs to be priority spending for Prince Edward Island taxpayer dollars so that their lives and outcomes, especially in health, are better than they are today. So that's where I think focus has to be on the healthcare system. Keeping our doctors at UPI, keeping our nurses at UPI, make sure they stay at Prince Edward Island. There will be lots of them that will want to go travel, see the world, and I'm not opposed to that. But the ones that want to stay here, make it a fit, help them out, and I think we'll have a better system afterwards. But help them out too with these medical homes and make it a collaborative approach, bigger than it is today.
I think that's a really important point about the deficit, because one of the frustrations I have all the time is, in government, I want money to be spent well. But we always talk about financial deficits and we ignore the fact that we sometimes get into care deficits because we don't want to spend the money. And I think you're right that when it comes to healthcare, like, you have to spend the money. The model you're talking about is really interesting to me because my own doctor is part of a family health clinic. And I think there's something like 36,000 patients at our one clinic in Ontario, which is a wild number. But there are a whole bunch of different specialists that we get access to because of that. And I'm not always necessarily seeing my doctor now. I'm sure he works constantly and is exhausted as well. But it does sound like a pretty good model. The one last thing on health I wanted to ask you about is wait times, because in Ontario, I've seen a conversation happening, including from physicians themselves, about how we should start scheduling surgeries overnight because the surgical rooms are sitting empty and why not use them? My concern about that is we know from a patient perspective that often leads to worse outcomes in terms of healing after the surgery. And I always have the question of whether it's great to have these doctors working these very long hours overnight, whether that actually makes sense from a performance perspective. Because at the end of the day, we want people to survive these surgeries, right? Yeah, and we want our doctors to be able to continue practicing. How would you tackle that? Is that something you're looking into, or do you think this idea of just staffing out more is actually a better approach?
So I guess that conversation has been held in Prince Edward Island for a number of years about, running 24/7 ORs and other needs to be met in the after hours. I think, our medical frontline people have to be supportive of whatever measure you're going to put in place. Now that should go through a full due diligence process. You're right. We want the health outcome of the person that's being treated to be positive. We don't want them, in hospital extended stays because something went wrong, because somebody was probably tired when they should have been sleeping. I get all of those measures. So I think you'd have to have full buy-in from all those professionals that will be a part of this. I'm not sure that we're there today, but I'm not sure that we can't get there someday too down the road. So that is the big thing, is making sure that your complement of physicians is right, your complement of surgeons is right. The way the process runs today meets the needs. But I know even in Charlottetown, our largest Prince Edward Island Hospital, I get calls all the time where we were supposed to get my knee done today, but we got bumped for some other reason. And those are hard messages for people to hear who've been waiting a number of weeks or months for that particular surgery. But obviously that person that bumped them was a priority and needed to have something done, possibly life and death situation. So those are just things we need to manage here. But not saying that that's something that couldn't come to be, a reality down the road. But obviously you want those that are going to be involved in it to be supportive of it. And if that's not the case, then we'll have to continue those conversations, I guess. Yeah.
So I could probably talk to you about healthcare for the entire day, but we will move on topic-wise. I do want to talk about land because I think, there are a few things as top of mind to islanders as how to use the limited land that you have on the island. It's not just the fact that there's only so much of it, it's the fact that it's beautiful, and you're known nationwide and globally for how beautiful the province is. And like anywhere else, there's housing shortages, there's questions about affordability with housing that is being built, there's questions about community stability and making sure that everyone who lives there is happy with the outcomes that you're seeing. You're a former minister of community, I'm going to get this right, communities, land, and environment,
Yes.
which, pretty much comprises all of those things together. I'm wondering, with PEI's rapid population growth, I think the last I saw it was like 40% over a few years' time. Like, it's a massive increase compared to elsewhere. Given all that population growth, how would you actually address housing and infrastructure to support that? Because I think we want to make sure that as people come in, it's still affordable for everybody and everybody has their needs taken care of. How would you tackle that?
Yeah, so Prince Edward Island, like everywhere in Canada, I believe, we had our immigration influx was significantly on the rise over the last while. Now, as everywhere else, it's slowed down recently, but we did find ourselves in our population increased like to 190,000 from 140 a short time ago. So did all the infrastructure keep up? No, it did not, and which now put a strain on our whole system, our whole housing system, and other systems as well, our healthcare system, our education system. It all became an issue. But in the housing, obviously, you need to have a roof over your head. You need to have a safe place to live and raise your family in. So these are issues that have really came to the forefront, over the last number of years. I think there's been some cuts to funding that was put forward to housing, which probably wasn't the best time for the government of the day to look at that measure. I don't think I would have went down that road. But in conversation, I think there's, when you talk to developers today, who they want to continue developing and they have the skills and the manpower, and you want to keep those jobs rolling as well, but there is a struggle in how they can what their costs are associated to building a place to what they need to get for rents out of it, which is not always meets the needs for our low rental situations or housing needs that we need to have. So for me, and I've talked to them, I think we need to kind of look at this in three ways. We need to look short term, medium term, long term. There's a certain sense from some developers is government stay out of the way, let me build new units, let the older units free up, and then eventually the rentals will get down. But that's the word I use there is eventually, which does not mean the need for today. So I think government has to really be a real player in this and develop housing that we put in place and we can rent it at a level where people can survive and live in, and then down the road as things develop for the other housing measures, well, maybe we pass that over to somebody else to be a part of. But it's to try to meet the needs of today first. And I've had that conversation with others and people that are looking for housing, and they go, well, that's wonderful. Second solution is maybe to purchase or invest in some local properties that become available year over year, month over month, and get to the level where we need to be. So we're not immune as any other province or even city like Charlottetown. These are real issues that need to be addressed, and we need to we can't say immigration is bad, because we need immigration, we need change, and we need new people coming in to do new work, to open up new companies, to develop new strategies. So that needs to happen, but we need to have an infrastructure that meets all of those needs. And unfortunately, we, like other places, we're not ready for that. So we're a bit behind the eight ball, but we do have some research done that we know we can go down several paths here to at least improve the situation. And then we can open up some immigration streams again.
I think the piece about immigration is really important because what people often forget is it was provincial premiers across the country who had asked the prime minister to expand immigration, one, to staff out healthcare, but also to staff out construction for building new housing. And that was a major reason for it because, of course, demographically, Canada isn't producing as many babies as it did, 100 years ago. So things are changing and you do need people to actually do this labor. I used to work at the Ministry of Housing in Ontario, and this was 10 years ago now, and we saw the crisis coming at that time, and we tried to make some adjustments, and some of those things were reversed by the Conservative government that followed us, as happens. But I think one of the most important things that I've heard from developers is that there needs to be stability. And again, you have talked about stability in your leadership quite a bit. There needs to be stability for them to be able to plan. So, housing material costs, they stayed pretty much the same for about 20 years. And then the pandemic hit and the trade wars hit, and that changed some of those conversations, and some of these costs have risen. But a lot of it is they've really asked for stability and a long-term plan from governments of what to expect when they're building these projects. Because some of these projects, I have 9 towers going up on my block alone right now. And some of those towers aren't going to happen now, probably because the condo market's crashing. But the other part of it is they take like up to 5 years to build, and you're trying to get the financing, you're trying to get pre-purchases and all these kinds of things. And it's a little bit different with rentals, but similar thing. How much long-term planning are you going to put into your housing plan when you become premier?
I think we need to do a lot more work in our long-term planning for housing in Prince Edward Island. We're the same as other provinces. We have an aging population that needs to be part of the data, but we do have this immigration, which is on stall now, but could start up anytime, and there's opportunities there to move forward. So, some of this, I won't call it knee-jerk, but sometimes a knee-jerk reaction does not prove out to be the best plan. So we do need to do more work there. We do need to do more planning. I know of several developers who are looking to, I'll say, pull the trigger on some projects, but are struggling in various levels, with government answering today and red tape, which is always another issue. So these are things that are on my plan to deal with. I won't have that silver bullet instantly, but if we do some good, solid data collection research, where we are, where we're heading, what do we want our goal to be, we can have some effective results. And to involve everybody, we need to listen to all. We need to listen to those that are unhoused. We need to listen to those that are housed but would like to see rents reduced. We need to look at developers. So all of those pieces need to come together, and they haven't been in a very good fashion as of late. And it's work that needs to really be focused upon in Prince Edward Island, and no doubt in other jurisdictions as well.
So before we go, I want to talk about PEI's role in the Federation. I'm of the opinion that PEI has largely punched above its weight in terms of what people may expect of its role in the national fabric of our country. We've got a lot of different issues happening in Canada right now. We have trade issues, both internally and externally. We've got sovereignty in terms of, what's going on south of the border. And then we've also got the national unity conversation that's happening right now. So, past Liberal premiers like Giz played an important role in constitutional discussions, a generation ago at this point. PEI was very important in those conversations and helped hold the country together at key points in our history, during the Quebec referendum and things like that. Yeah. What would you do as premier to be a part of that national conversation? What do you think PEI can offer to the rest of the country as we try and handle these different challenges?
So, to your point about PEI punching above its weight, we've been doing that for a long time. To some of your listeners may not even be aware that Prince Edward Island is the birthplace of Confederation. It's where the first talks of forming Canada began, right here in little Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. Since that time, we've continued to punch above our weight. We have 4 members of Parliament from our small little 170,000 populated island here, but that was something that came, as Confederation for Prince Edward Island, and we have we've always had capable MPs go to fight for Prince Edward Island, Canada. But that does not mean that's where it has to stop. Our premiers and our government, cabinet ministers and everything, should be able to have a strong voice at what gets done within Canada. I have to say that in my time as Minister of Communities and Environment and Minister of Health, when you'd go to provincial federal meetings, I was always treated with the greatest of respect, even though you were from the smallest province of Canada. You had your opportunity to bring forward, everything that was on your mind that you'd like to see changes or adjustments to, I guess would be the best way to put it. And I have to say, I was so appreciative of that approach for little Prince Edward Island, smallest little province stuck over on the eastern side of Canada. But I think there's more work that we could do as a province, with the federal government of today, especially to enhance what occurs here. In the summertime of Prince Edward Island, our population grows by 1 million people instantly on July 1st weekend and stays till, basically the end of September. We're a cruise ship destination, for, there was over 105 cruise ships come to Prince Edward Island. We have big things to offer here, and we have an equal voice at the table, but that does, we should be able to have an equal voice and express more things that we need to have changed in Prince Edward Island. I would look forward as Premier to have that opportunity to do that, and to sit at the table of the Federation of Premiers across Canada to support what they're doing and have them support what we're doing. And I don't think there's ever been a better time in the history of the Canada or the world where there's a better time to band together to face what's going on around us, to the south, to the west, to the east, just to make sure that we are in the best place we can be. We are the best country in the world. There's no question about that. And arguably, I feel we are one of the best provinces in the world here. So to keep growing partnerships, to keep making progress, that's something that I will commit to, and I vow to do continuously if I get to be the Premier of Prince Edward Island.
I can't think of a better note to end on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teresa. I really appreciate you reaching out to do this today.
You've been listening to Progress Canada, presented by Lightbulb Narrative, a Canadian-owned company specializing in strategic communications, narrative development, and content creation. Our music today was composed by Elliot Middleton. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to access future episodes the moment they drop. Thanks for listening.